It is September 30th, 2024, and it's being reported that anonymous U.S. officials are saying that Israel is telling Washington that a ground invasion of Lebanon is imminent. That's a ground invasion of the sovereign nation that Israel has been bombing mercilessly for the last several days, using weapons and bombs that were made in the USA, doing it all with the help of U.S. intelligence, U.S. public and political cover. As I always say here, every single war crime that Israel is carrying out right now, the U.S. is complicit in. And of course, you don't see any attempt by the U.S., it appears, to try to de-escalate tensions here, at least in a meaningful way. All of this, of course, after Israel violated international law in a number of different ways in order to assassinate Hezbollah Secretary General Syed Hassan Nasrallah on Friday, leaving a number of questions about where Hezbollah stands, what it means for the region, and if this full-scale war that we are currently in is going to continue to escalate even more. We got into all of the latest with a special guest, but first, just a quick note that YouTube is currently purging a number of my videos related to Ukraine, involving guests who have had their channels deleted or have been targeted by YouTube censorship in one way or another on Ukraine. So if you value my content when it comes to anything related to Ukraine, Russia, or really anywhere in that region, please take a moment to check out my page on Substack to consider signing up as a monthly subscriber there. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you can find all of my latest work, including this video that you are about to watch. And speaking of, let's get into the interview now. Joining me now to discuss is veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier. Elijah, thanks so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, I want to get your take on the latest here. I know that a lot has happened over the last week, and we now have the Washington Post reporting that Israel is telling the U.S. that a ground invasion of Lebanon is imminent. This, of course, after Israel assassinated Hezbollah Secretary General Syed Hassan Nasrallah on Friday in a truly unprecedented attack. What do you make of the latest escalations and really where the conflict stands now that Israel has gone as far as to actually assassinate Nasrallah?
Well, actually, the sabotage attack a couple of weeks ago on the pager, and then the following day on the ICOM V-84, and then the assassination of several leaders, and ending it with the assassination of the Hezbollah Secretary General, Said Hassan Nasrallah, is a plan that aims to create a confusion among Hezbollah. And then the Israelis started a large aerial campaign bombing all the Hezbollah's capabilities that Israel knows about. And that lasts for a week, bombarding more than 3,500 objectives, which is highly significant, and then killing any Hezbollah leaders of the top level or the second level of even operative with their families in their homes. And all that is a preparation for a ground invasion. And we have seen now that once Israel is confident that it has reduced Hezbollah's capability, then the possibility of an invasion is on the table. Nevertheless, Israel did not fight yet with the Ridwan special forces that have not been engaged in this battle. And the confusion that the Israelis have created in the back of the Ridwan forces that are deployed on the south of Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, it is irrelevant to the order of engagement with the enemy, with their enemy, that is Israel, in this case. And for that, they don't really need a Secretary General or a central command that still exists.
Good to know. I know that there's been a lot of questions about the setup of Hezbollah, right? What this means for the group right now. And when it comes to the possibility of a ground invasion, I mean, I would assume that Israel would not move forward with anything unless it had not just a green light from the US, but also increased support from the US. I know that when it comes to what we're hearing from Washington, the Pentagon announced on Sunday steps to bolster its forces in the Middle East amid Israel's nonstop bombardment of Lebanon. So, does it seem as though the US is giving Israel that green light for a ground invasion and that could truly be imminent?
It's impossible for the Israeli to go to war and invade Lebanon, a sovereign country, without the US approval, planning, intelligence, supply of munition, and cover up of its violation at the United Nations and on the international arena. The concentration in the Israeli American narrative over only Hezbollah is omitting the fact that Israel is bombarding a sovereign country. It is violating the sovereignty of Lebanon. It is bombing Lebanese who are living there, who are born there, and it is destroying Lebanese homes. It is destroying civilians, like the assassination of Sayyid Nasrallah happened in an area that is heavily crowded and destroying 4 entire buildings with everybody. The assassination against Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah commander, killed with it 8 civilians and wounded 85. All these casualties that are happening among the civilians are ignored by the press. The concentration of the press is only about Hezbollah, which are Lebanese, and about the role of Hezbollah in, for example, the Marines, etc. But the Marines came to Lebanon as an invaders. They were not invited by the Lebanese. So people have the right to defend themselves in Lebanon. Therefore, they still Lebanese defending their land, and it is not up to the mainstream media to eliminate completely this factor and concentrate on an organization like it is detaching this organization from the rest of the country. This is not how things go. It is an attack of Israel against Lebanon, that is a sovereign country, the killing of Lebanese, the attack on civilians, the attack on the infrastructure, the displacement of more than 1 million people, and the preparation for a ground invasion of the south of Lebanon. This is what the mainstream media is not mentioning.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring that up because the impact on civilians has been incredibly large. I mean, even going back to the pager attacks, then to the bombings that Israel carried out last week that killed hundreds of civilians in Lebanon. And this is something that the international community, even while you have some that are, expressing their frustration with Israel, sure, they're not taking any meaningful action, even when in this case it's being reported that Israel was using 2,000-pound bombs that had been supplied by the US that are illegal to be used in a heavily populated civilian area under the Geneva Convention. And yet Israel is doing this proudly, right? The US is standing by them, and their statements in the aftermath were not, we condemn any of this, we condemn the killing of hundreds of civilians, the illegal use of these munitions. No, they were continuing to say that they stand with Israel. What does that tell us about what kind of position the international community is in, where for the last year they have stood by and watched as Israel has carried out a genocide against the Palestinians? Now they're watching as Israel is expanding not just that war, but those tactics to the Lebanese civilians, and they again continue to stand by.
Well, it is important to make the math here. Israel used 80 bombs of each 2,000 pound, which means that Israel used all this quantity of ammunition that comes from the US against one location, creating an earthquake in the capital, Beirut. So this is so significant and major that Israel feels unaccountable, enjoying impunity to go and use American weapons with the agreement of the Americans of this kind, of this scale, against one small group of 4 buildings together. It shows the level of agreement between the Israelis and the Americans, the tolerance to use American weapons indiscriminately against civilian infrastructure and civilian areas. And it showed the complicity of the planning, of the cover up of the Americans when they are briefing in press conferences, the announcement of President Joe Biden or his spokesperson. They all are presenting this as a normal fact that Israel is getting rid of all the terrorist group in the area, and then well done, Israel. This is how it is presented by the Americans. Now, what happened is there is a shift in the Middle East, and this shift is Israel was a burden and a weight on the Americans and their allies. They've considered that what Israel did in Gaza were crime against humanity, war crimes, and intent of genocide. They're not doing anything different in Lebanon. They are doing crime against humanity and war crime. They're displacing intentionally people, asking them to leave area. Again, the same scenario as in Gaza, moving them outside the suburb of Beirut. So they have displaced more than 1 million people who are still outside sitting without any support from a broken Lebanese government. So this is something that the Americans agree with, and this is something that the Americans look at the Israelis today as a new player in the Middle East that has recovered from being at the International Court of Justice and considered as a war criminal at Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, and the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, by the International Criminal Court, to now the hero of the Middle East that is getting rid of Hamas and now of Hezbollah, and he's cutting all the Iranian arms in the Middle East and pushing Iran out of its comfort zone and challenging even Iran, threatening Iran to bomb it if ever Iran retaliates against the Israeli violation of Iranian sovereignty when they've killed Ismail Haniyeh, the political bureau chief of Hamas, in the capital Tehran. So after all that, we see not only double standard and hypocrisy, we see the absence of international laws. And we have to acknowledge that we've lost all international laws and we've crossed all boundaries. This is why Israel permits itself to do what it's doing and will continue doing so unless it is stopped by someone. And the war is not over, it's just beginning. And if Israel wants to push forces in Lebanon, we have to see if this is going to be a success or a failure.
Yeah, and I know when it comes to stopping Israel, it's certainly not going to be the US. They have made that very clear. It was also notable to me, when it comes to Nasrallah, his legacy, really the role that he played, not just as the chief of Hezbollah, but in Lebanon and in the region. It was so notable to me that we got these initial reports citing, I know, anonymous Israeli officials, but they said that the reason that Israel chose to go after Nasrallah and to eventually assassinate him was because when it came to talks for a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel over these border clashes, he said, okay, we can have a ceasefire, but you must have a ceasefire for Gaza too, because the entire point of these border clashes, as we've been talking about for months here, has been that Hezbollah is standing up for the Palestinian people. They are making sure that Israel is, at the very least, held accountable in the north, if nowhere else, if no one else in the world aside from the resistance is going to do it, that they are going to take a stand. How likely is that to be the case? And what does that tell us about Nasrallah, his legacy, and really his fight for the Palestinian people in a way that really almost no one else in the world was willing to stand up and to fight?
This part of the Lebanese society has suffered a lot throughout the centuries. And because they understand the suffering, they felt the link with the Palestinian people who suffered for the last 78 years of this apartheid regime and all the massacres they've gone through with Israel. Because of that, Lebanon felt it is impossible to watch people next door on their borders killed without any intervention of the international community by an entity like Israel, who consider them animals, cut water, electricity, food supply, everything, push them to be internally displaced 8 times in this very small strip. And this is why Hezbollah is paying the price for supporting the Palestinians today, and is going to be facing an invasion by the Israelis because of this support for Palestine. But this is not going to change the position of Hezbollah, because it's a question of humanity. It's a human approach. And the day Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah decided to support the Palestinians, he understood the consequences and he was ready to pay for that. And because he was ready to pay for the consequences, what is happening today in Lebanon is not something that was not foreseen and on the table. In fact, since the 8th of October, Hezbollah started to engage with Israel because of its support to Palestine, knowing that the Israelis can be without mercy against Lebanon. And this is exactly what happened. So Sayyid Nasrallah took this decision and dragged the entire Shia population with him, who were happy to follow him for the same cause, because they understand what suffering is and they understand how they were abandoned and how the Palestinians were abandoned and what they are feeling in a small strip where they suffer a daily killing by a merciless enemy. And the consequences of that is the potential invasion of Lebanon. There are going to be many people who are going to be killed, many people who are going to be displaced. There is a possibility of Israel to start bombing schools with people in it, or tents, or public places where there are refugees, accusing them of hosting Hezbollah operative, exactly like it was doing in Gaza, to put pressure on Hezbollah, particularly if the Hezbollah special forces manage to inflict serious damage on Israel while confronting them on the ground once they push the forces in. And Netanyahu is going to seek revenge against the people. This is what he does normally, and something that he does extremely well, to kill civilians. But if he is going to do that, it means he's suffering on the front. And I think the Lebanese society, those who support the Palestinians at Hezbollah, will not complain about these suffering because they've been through that in the past. So it is not a win cause for Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, I'm with you. I agree. He's very good at killing civilians, not very good at defeating the resistance movements, because at the end of the day, I mean, exactly as we saw when Nasrallah became Secretary General, Hezbollah has just come back and come stronger every single time. And Israel keeps giving them more and more reasons to come back and to get stronger every time. Now, I also want to ask you before we go about where Iran stands in all of this, because I know I've seen a lot of the chatter on social media. There seems to be a lot of frustration from some, especially in the West, notably with Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. They claim that, because he said in the past that he wants to have better relations with the West, that he wants the sanctions to be lifted, against Iran, that somehow he's not doing enough or getting involved enough in this conflict. How do you see Iran as it stands right now with its current leadership and what it is likely to do or the role that it could play in this expanding conflict?
Iran is a state, it's not a non state actor. The president is ruling the country to make sure that the economy is advancing and the opening of Iran to the international community, and not only to the West. When Pezeshkian was elected, he was elected on the base of economy and the overture toward the West. The problem is both are linked because Iran is under heavy sanctions. It doesn't mean that the West is going to open up to Iran. This is what Iran is trying to do. But the command of the armed forces and the IRGC is in the hand of Sayyid Ali Khamenei, not the president. Therefore, it is important for Iran to act as a state and to continue dealing with the countries around the world, and the IRGC, as it was committed and still is committed, to the support of the oppressed people around the world, it will continue doing so. But it doesn't mean Iran is going to send hundreds of thousands of troops and start fighting Israel, because it means a clear declaration from Iran against Israel, where the Americans will start doing like the Israelis are doing in Lebanon and Gaza, bombing Iran, and Iran is 1,700 kilometers away. So there is no point in talking about how Iran can send troops, how Iran is going to supply, let's say, 100,000 or 200,000 troops with ammunition, with food supply, with everything, when the war is knocking the door of Lebanon now. It's impossible. And secondly, what are the consequences on Iran if Iran is engaged in this war? If Iran remains healthy, it can support much better the resistance. And it can put pressure on the Americans through the Strait of Hormuz, through the Red Sea, and through other means to support the resistance. Because the leader of Hezbollah, as an ideological organization, is Sayyid Ali Khamenei, because Hezbollah believes in Wilayat al-Faqih. It is not Sayyid Nasrallah. And it is not any other leader that will run the organization domestically, because the organic link between Hezbollah and Iran is in obedience to the religious leader, that is Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who will never give up on the people of Lebanon who consider him as their leader. But it is not by a country that is going to wage war on Israel that Iran can support Hezbollah. Every single bullet that Hezbollah has fired and will continue firing against Israel comes from Iran. So Iran is already engaged, and I'm confident that it will continue to be engaged on the side of Lebanon and, in particular, the resistance.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot at stake here all around. And I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to not only break down the latest, but to give us some context and to maybe explain a few things, because I think that some people, especially in the West, think that the rest of the world works exactly how the West does. And they don't quite understand those nuances, especially when it comes to leadership. I know that we'll continue to follow all of the latest here, and I always appreciate your input. Veteran war correspondent Elijah Magnier, thank you so much for your time and insight.
It's great to be with you, Rachel.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. And again, YouTube is currently purging my videos, targeting a number of my top guests specifically on Ukraine. So it's more important now than ever, if you're watching this video on YouTube, to check out my other alternative platforms to sign up as a subscriber on my Substack. Every little bit helps. And if you want to support my work, you can also check out my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. That's where you can sign up as a monthly paid subscriber and join the community there. That's also where you'll get exclusive weekly episodes of my new series, Sanction, which is just for my paid subscribers. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.